One of my last cases made me explode. And above all, it made me remember all those strange and weird things that have happened in my consultation. It was already my third session with a 17-year-old boy. His parents had come to me because of his constant night terrors. Horrible nightmares that woke him up and prevented him from going back to sleep. The previous 2 sessions had been completely fruitless. I asked questions and he ignored them, or answered things that had nothing to do with it. It is well known that adolescence is the most difficult age to deal with, and he made good use of that reputation. However, I found myself again in front of him, repeating the same questions and suggestions I had asked in previous sessions. But that day was different. We need to open up a little, I suggested. We can't spend the sessions here without saying anything, just looking at each other. I never asked to come to this place, he answered. The instant he caught my attention, he did not look me in the eyes while he answered, and only rubbed his hands compulsively. I know, I said, but your parents think it is best for you. They are worried, and a worried father will do even the impossible to help his son. Do you think I can understand everything, doctor? But it's not like that. Why don't you let me decide that for myself? Come on, tell me and I'll tell you if I can understand it or not. Everything I say here will remain between us? He asked. I nodded my head sincerely. At that moment I meant it. I never thought that in the future I would be telling these things. He leaned back on the sofa. He began to look everywhere, then turned to the door as if checking how far away it was. I guessed he wanted to know if what he said would be heard by people outside. No sound comes out of here. Everything you tell will stay here, only. There are no recordings, nothing. Only my ears, I told him. My friends and I make videos about anecdotes and stories. We go to abandoned places or we do rituals that we see in other videos or read about in internet forums, he said, and I nodded so he knew I was paying attention. It was my duty to make him feel comfortable while he talked, but it was obvious he was not. He kept rubbing his hands compulsively. One of my friends, Oliver, had an idea. We would go to an abandoned house and make videos from there. Everyone thought it was a fun idea. You know, all those videos of abandoned houses where things appear are simply planned. We had in mind to throw some things or make something appear so that after we uploaded it, the people who saw the video would notice it and then we could act surprised. He paused, looking everywhere but at me. Continue, I said. We went in 5 people: Carlos, Oliver, Ramon, Roger and me, Ernesto. The first minutes were normal. We just went through the house, careful not to run into anyone alive, since in those places there are usually more things to watch out for. We were glad the house was empty. We recorded some footage to use later. We threw some objects to create noise and suspense. We even laughed while doing it. It was when Ramon had an idea. He took out a box from his backpack and set it on the floor in one of the rooms, among the dust and garbage left by previous inhabitants. From there he took out a cloth. We all saw him and were surprised because it was the first time he did that. What do you think if we use this? He asked. We all looked at each other, feeling a little strange, but somehow we accepted, and suddenly we were all sitting in a circle around the cloth. I had no idea where the conversation was going. I've seen movies and those famous videos on the internet, but I had always been skeptical. I think it was more because of morbid curiosity that I wanted him to continue. I sat down opposite Ramon. It was between the two of us who would start with the board. I don't know the rules for playing Ouija, but Ramon took out a piece of paper with something written on it. I couldn't read it, and he set it on fire. Then he asked me to put my hands on the planchette and he said that whatever happened he would not move it, much less lift his hands. He said we should not press either, since the movement is supposed to be smooth and involuntary. The others recorded this while we did it. My interest grew as he went on. We usually get impatient when patients ramble, but this story felt real. It felt different. I just wanted to know what he would tell me. We started with the basics. Is there anyone here? we asked a couple of times with no answer. Some of the guys even made jokes, throwing things to make noise, which at that point scared me. But suddenly, I felt my fingers being pulled toward the planchette toward a corner of the board. Even the words in English that were translated said, yes. Ramon looked at me and smiled malignantly, maybe because he was glad it worked or maybe because he thought it was me who did it. The thing is, we had reached the first point and from there everything changed. We started asking questions and the board answered. Simple questions. What year did you die? It answered 1869. How? In Chamula, because of the black stones. What is your name? Yajbal. I asked many other questions, though I already forgot most of them. Then Ramon had another idea. Apparently he had seen something online and I remember that question perfectly. Here he paused and rubbed his hands compulsively again. The tic I had noticed in previous sessions had intensified so much I felt his skin must hurt. The game of what? I asked. I don't want to mention it, he answered without looking at me. I'm afraid of the word. I haven't mentioned it since that happened and I don't want to do it. Okay, let's continue, I said, returning to my position. The board answered that it did know it, and Ramon asked if it wanted to play it. The answer was the same, yes. I watched him break down in tears. Can you tell me what the game was about? I asked, trying to get more information, but he just kept crying. We read about it on the internet, he continued. You must ask the board if it wants to play. If the board is willing, it will tell you yes, which it did with us. At first I still thought Ramon was moving it to fake some supernatural thing. I never took my eyes off him so I knew I was really paying attention. Do you know the board? He asked me. I've seen it, yes, but not in person, only in movies and series, so I think I know it. It's a wooden board, normally. It has the alphabet, the words yes and no, and numbers from 0 to 9. The game consisted of this. After asking if it wanted to play and the board said yes, the board would start counting from 9 to 0 6 times. That's 1 minute. During that time, something would look for us. And what happens if it finds you? I asked, intrigued. That didn't come from the internet, Ernesto answered with a broken voice, trying to contain his crying. The board began to creak and we all ran to hide. Some laughed, but I was really scared. How would I know if it finds you? We had no idea. I ran to one of the rooms the furthest from where there were some abandoned sheets. I got behind them and didn't hear anyone's noise, so I assumed no one had hidden in the same room. There was no door because the place was completely destroyed. He took a break and took his sight off my eyes. He began rubbing his hands again. His eyes were completely bloodshot from holding back tears. I swear I heard someone enter the room where I was. It was very dark, but my eyes were already used to the dark so I would have noticed if someone had come in. But I could only hear footsteps, very close footsteps. So close that I began to hear slow, calm breathing while I tried not to breathe to make any noise. But suddenly everything stopped, the noise, the breathing. Then I heard the voices of the boys outside. I knew the time had passed. I slowly left my hideout, still looking around. There was nothing. That presence, I suppose, had vanished into the darkness. And what did you do? I asked, breaking a brief silence. We all went back to the room where the board was. I asked them if they had seen or heard anything and they all said no. They laughed, but when they saw my face they asked if I had any experience. I told them what had happened. Instead of ending the game, they took it as a challenge and decided to play again. I told them I didn't want to anymore, but everyone insisted and I was terrified. I was really terrified. He broke down in tears again. I could feel his suffering was real, but I still couldn't find the background of all this. I knew there was something else he hadn't told me yet, so I pressed on. Oliver took my place. They asked him if he wanted to play again, and the board said yes. I saw how it moved again down from 9, continuing to count backwards. I had not told the doctor, or maybe I did, I don't know. but the Ouija moved completely on its own. I lost a few seconds watching it move, and almost for a second I thought I saw a shadow inked on the board moving the planchette. To this day I think it might have been my imagination, but a scream brought me back to reality and I ran from that place to my hideout. Once in my hideout I heard nothing. No steps, no breathing. I waited until I heard someone call and then left. I returned to the room and the adrenaline faces were still there. We met again. However, something was different. Oliver was missing. We looked for him among us, but he wasn't there. Ernesto was no longer crying. His face had become a somber portrait of a hopeless person. He looked completely devastated, looking at nothing, babbling things I couldn't hear or understand. We searched every room. There was no trace. We searched outside, in the car, everywhere. We called his phone, which rang in one of the rooms, but that was the only sign we found. "We must ask him," said Ramon. I was completely terrified. All I wanted was to get out. After some arguing, Ramon sat at the table and asked, "Where is Oliver?" And the only thing the board answered was, "I have it." We asked if it would let him go and it just said no. We insisted in 1,000 ways I don't remember and the only thing it ever answered was no. We never saw Oliver again. When his parents asked, we lied and said he had plans to leave the city. They had a lot of problems, so they believed us, though they still search for him. But will they ever find him? I asked. He looked at me fixedly. "No," he said. "Now tell me, doctor, do you understand? What do you think can understand everything? Do you understand what happened? Do you understand what I feel?" "No," I answered without knowing why. "I don't understand." "I knew it," he said, pretending a smile. "No one who has been in that place can." He got up from the chair and ended the session when I should have. I just sat there as he approached the door. He stood with his back to me, hand on the knob. "If one day someone comes to ask about me, about that event, that's the version I want you to tell them," he said. "Why are you saying that?" I asked. He stood there, looking at nothing. "What we didn't say, what we read on the internet, was what would happen if it found you. The second time we played, it found Oliver. But we didn't all go back to the room as I mentioned before. I was hiding behind those sheets when the time ran out, or stopped because it found me, I don't know." He took a deep breath, still with his back to me. I don't remember anything after that moment. The only thing I remember was being back in the room where the table was with the other four. The first thing I noticed was a feeling of moisture on my hands and body. It was dark, but I could identify blood. My clothes were soaked in it. The others were the same. After checking each of us, I remember we looked at each other with faces full of terror. On the floor, doctor, was Oliver. His belly was completely open and his organs were scattered on the floor. There was a horrible smell. It was as if many fluids and other smells mixed in that environment. I was completely stunned. I didn't want him to turn around because I didn't think I could hold his eyes, but I noticed he kept rubbing his hands and he said several times he still felt that humidity on his hands. "Do you want to know what we did with the body, doctor?" he asked, his voice for a moment firm and without hesitation, almost as if it were someone else. Then, calmer. "Or do you know that simply, he didn't appear after the second game and we never knew about him again? They never found him after the second game." I answered with fear, "That is the truth. Although the video we recorded that night as evidence of everything we told says the opposite." Then he opened the door and left. I've had this conversation replaying in my mind all week. I wondered if I should go to the authorities to tell them what that young man told me or keep it as just a story. I started to investigate. It is true that that young man is missing, so the story must be partly real. There were deaths in Chamula in 1869 because of obsidian stones, the black stones. Also, I know that the name of my patient is not Ernesto. Therefore, now I know the name of the game.